A very good morning here. This Thursday morning, we are back again with another special broadcast, this time on the Prime Minister's 5-day visit to the United States. A series of events that are lined up there, right from New York to Washington. Lots to look forward to over the next 3 days, where the Prime Minister will be a part of the first in-person Quad Summit. You've got the UNGA and also bilateral with the US President Joe Biden. Lots to look forward to. The action is all happening at this point of time in Washington. Then it moves to New York. We'll get the action as it happens on ground zero. We've got a team of reporters. They're giving you non-stop coverage on the Prime Minister's visit to the United States. And we'll kickstart this special broadcast over the next 2 hours. That's 120 minutes of direct action there from United States of America, where we've got our correspondent on ground zero giving us all the insights on the Prime Minister's visit. I am Anil Thomas, and to take you through my co-anchor for the morning, Shubhendu. Good morning.
Thank you, Anil. Good morning and warm welcome to this special presentation, Prime Minister's visit to the United States. You're watching DD India. This is the place where you get the most comprehensive coverage of Prime Minister's crucial visit to United States. A lot of important regional global issues in focus, whether it is safety and security in the Indo-Pacific region, the common challenge facing the world of the COVID pandemic, or talking about closer ties as far as technology and emerging infrastructure is concerned. On all those counts, a very crucial visit for Prime Minister. Of course, yesterday we saw Prime Minister addressing the Global COVID Summit, where he not only spoke about the need to come together as an international community and work together to end the pandemic, but also highlighted the role that India has been playing and is willing to play in the road ahead in taking that challenge head on. So we'll be talking about that and all that is going to come ahead. And warm welcome once again to the special presentation, Prime Minister's visit to the United States.
Well, let's begin first with the Prime Minister's arrival. That happened a little while ago. Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrived in Washington, D.C. for a 4-day U.S. visit. Despite rains, exuberant members of Indian diaspora
Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrives in Washington, D.C. for a 4-day U.S. visit. Despite rains, exuberant members of Indian diaspora welcome Prime Minister with chants of Modi Modi. PM Modi describes diaspora as India's strength.
Prime Minister Modi to interact with leading CEOs to highlight economic opportunities in India, to hold bilateral meetings with Australian and Japanese counterparts, to also meet US Vice President Kamala Harris.
Team DD India brings all the action from ground zero in Washington, D.C. and in New York.
I'll get you all the updates from Washington, D.C. This is Gautam Roy.
World leaders gather in New York. I bring you the latest news and updates.
Camera person Smriti Ranjan, Arun Sharma, Doordarshan News, Washington, D.C.
Prime Minister Modi addresses the global COVID-19 summit hosted by US President Joe Biden. PM stresses on pushing through TRIPS waiver at WTO for COVID vaccines, diagnostics and medicine. President Biden says Quad partnership is on track to help produce at least 1 billion vaccine doses in India by the end of 2022. Pledges over 1.1 billion doses for the world.
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar participates in the G20 meeting called on Afghanistan, says Taliban must not be allowed to use Afghan soil for terrorism. Foreign ministers of G4 countries also meet during the 76th session of UNGA in New York. Jaishankar stresses to make Security Council more legitimate, effective and representative.
Well, those were the headlines at the top of this hour. Now, for the Prime Minister reaching early this morning in Washington, D.C., Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Washington this morning. Prime Minister was greeted on his arrival by Ambassador of India to United States of America, Taranjit Singh Sandhu, and US Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources, T.H. Brian McCon. Over the next 2 days, Prime Minister Modi will be meeting US President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris. Prime Minister Scott Morrison and Yoshihide Suga of Japan. He will also attend the Quad meeting and would also interact with leading CEOs to highlight the economic opportunities in India. This is the first transatlantic visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi since COVID-19 pandemic broke out.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi touched down in Washington, D.C. on his first transcontinental visit and his second foreign visit since the COVID pandemic.
I'm here to see my beloved Prime Minister, Mr. Modi. We are so excited. We don't mind staying in the rain. It is very instrumental in bringing US-India ties much more stronger. Only he is the leader who can solve the situations in the world.
The second leg will see him in New York to attend the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. From the first bilateral meeting with President Joe Biden and leaders of the Quad countries to participation in the Quad Summit and his address to the UNGA. It's a high-power, action-packed agenda. This will be the first in-person bilateral meeting between the two leaders since President Biden took office. Previously, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had met Joe Biden, who was then the Vice President in the Obama administration, during his visit to the USA in 2014 and in 2016, when he chaired the joint session of the US Congress.
The leaders have been in regular contact in recent months. The Prime Minister has also participated in 3 major conferences and summits with President Biden as a participant. These were the Quad Leaders Summit, which was virtually held in March this year. This was also the Climate Leaders Summit, which President Biden has hosted. Both these summits were hosted by President Biden. But they also participated in the G7 summit. The Prime Minister attended virtually in Cornwall in the UK.
The last 2 decades, the relationship between the United States and India has been heading in positive and upward direction. In fact, in the first 100 days of Biden administration, we have had intensive interactions between our 2 democratic polities. This is despite all the pressures of COVID and the limitations that have been placed by it. So at least 3 times both the leaders spoke to each other. There were 2 summits, one on climate and one the first Quad virtual summit, in which Prime Minister Modi had a prominent place, and he addressed and expressed his presence there.
On September 23, Prime Minister will also meet Prime Minister Morrison of Australia and Prime Minister Suga of Japan to take stock of the strong bilateral relations with their respective countries and continue useful exchanges on regional and global issues. On the same day, Prime Minister will also hold a meeting with select CEOs of global companies. US-India bilateral trade in goods and services reached $149 billion in 2019.
The corporate sector is keenly observing this visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi as to how India and US can come forward and can create a better trade and investment regime, because all eyes will be on the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and of course US President Joe Biden as to how can a better investment regime or the trade regime can be created so that India's Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India initiative can also get a major push.
Arun Sharma's report, DD India.
And amidst loud chants of Modi, Modi, exuberant members of the Indian diaspora accorded warm welcome to Prime Minister Modi upon his arrival at Joint Base Andrews in Washington, D.C. In a tweet message, Prime Minister expressed gratitude towards the Indian community in Washington, D.C. for the warm welcome. Prime Minister said, "Our diaspora is our strength, and it is commendable how the Indian diaspora has distinguished itself across the world."
During Prime Minister's interaction with leading CEOs, according to sources, he will be meeting CEOs of Qualcomm, Abbott, First Solar, General Atomics and Blackstone in Washington. The list represents companies from the field of technology, renewable energy, software, drone and investment funds. The Prime Minister will meet Qualcomm CEO Cristiano R. Amon. Qualcomm is the world's leading wireless technology innovator. It is credited with inventing breakthrough technologies that transformed how the world connects, computers and communicates. Its portfolio includes products for processors, modems, platforms, RF systems and connectivity, plus products based on end-use application. Prime Minister will also meet Shantanu Narayan, Chairman, President and Chief Executive Office of Abbott. Abbott is a multinational computer software corporation. It pioneered the paper-to-digital transformation with the invention of PDF. Prime Minister Modi will also hold talks with First Solar CEO Mark Widmer. First Solar has developed, financed, engineered, constructed and currently operates many of the world's largest grid-connected PV solar plants. First Solar is a pioneer in the field of solar panel production and also has expertise in the production of utility-scale PV power plants and related services. It has a 15-year track record of manufacturing, developing, financing, engineering, constructing and operating the world's leading sources of sustainable solar energy. Prime Minister will also meet General Atomics CEO Vivek Lal. General Atomics is a defense and diversified technologies company. GE Aeronautical Systems produces a series of unmanned aircraft and provides electro-optical radar, signals, intelligence and automated airborne surveillance systems. GA's Electromagnetic Systems division produces electromagnetic aircraft, launch and recovery systems for the US Navy, satellite surveillance, electromagnetic railgun, high-power laser, hypervelocity projectile and power conversion systems. Prime Minister will also meet Blackstone CEO Stephen A. Schwarzman. Blackstone is an investment management firm, one of the world's leading investment firms with a $684 billion asset under management as on 30th of June 2021. The CEO has been involved in all phases of Blackstone's development since its founding in 1985. The firm has established leading investment businesses across asset classes, including private equity, where it's a global leader in traditional buyout, growth equity, special situations and secondary investing. Real estate, where it's currently the largest owner of property in the world, hedge fund solutions, where it's the world's largest discretionary hedge fund investor, and credit, where it is a global leader and major provider of credit for small, middle market and other companies.
And the CEO and MD of Invest India, Deepak Bangla, spoke with our correspondent Arun Sharma, where he said India's growth story gives confidence to American corporate sector to invest in India. He mentioned how India received major FDI even during the COVID crisis. Let's listen in.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is visiting USA and the corporate sector is also closely monitoring his visit as to what can be the big outcomes and takeaways as far as visit is concerned. To talk more on that, I'm joined by MD and CEO of Invest India, Mr. Deepak Bangla. So thank you for joining us on DD India. First of all, how the corporate sector is looking at Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit and, what key takeaways they're expecting as of now and why are they more than eager to invest in India?
You know, it's very evident. When you look at it, there's a very significant level of buzz and enthusiasm of the visit. And let's go by statistics, what we have seen. We closed March 31st, 2021, our last year, with the highest ever FDI we've received in our history, $81.5 billion. What's more interesting is that we received this at a time when global FDI was going down by 35%. India's FDI went up by over 10%. And more interestingly, India was one of the very few countries which has moved up its ranking as an FDI destination country from number 8 to number 5. So now we are in the top 5 destinations, nations for FDI recipients, and that too at a time when there was virtual lockdown across the globe. But what's more interesting, if I may add that, is the opportunity space which is opening up in India. This FDI this time has come from 89 countries. That means 89 countries trust India today. The second element to that, this money has come across 63 sectors. Look at the entire effort of the government, which has been to broad base and open the opportunity space across more and more sectors, where we can start working together, not just for the ease of doing business, but for the ease of living. In fact, a number of new sectors are now emerging. I'll give you an example: storage, data storage. Of the total investment which has come into data storage in India so far, 40% came just last year itself. So we are seeing a number of these smaller sectors open up, which are touching from fisheries to agriculture, to horticulture, to R&D, to innovation, and to high-tech, mobility, and renewable energy. Another very big one. We've been looked at the global leaders on that. So this opportunity space is increasing tremendously. And at the same point of time, the trust in the government's policy today that yes, India's tomorrow is better than every today. And the last most interesting thing, it has come across 63 sectors. India today is one of the most open economies in the world. And the moment we've come across these 63 sectors, these 89 countries, and add to that, this time it came into 29 states and union territories of India. Today, each and every state and union territory is open to FDI. It's creating opportunities where it is attracting FDI. So the new growth of a new India is now going to be a bottom-up, and it's not just going to be confined only to a few handful of states. And that, I think, is one of the biggest transformative factors which you will see as we stand on the threshold of a new India, frankly, the beginning of a new story.
Do you think the American corporates will be watching these structural reforms, the reforms that is taking place in India, like the drone policies, structural reforms at every level? All these things are being watched by the American corporates before they invest in some of the lucrative destinations.
Not just being watched. I think it's well acknowledged and appreciated. And that's where you see the big investments coming in. Nobody is going to put their money if they are not confident about the future and the opportunity space which it is. And I think you see both of these come in. One of the biggest things which has happened in India today is the trust which the global investor community has in India and its policies and its future.
Thank you so much, Mr. Bagla, for talking to us. So, Mr. Deepak Bagla clearly mentioning this point that the American corporates are more than confident primarily to invest in India, and Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to USA will play an important role in attracting investment to India as well. With camera person Vinay, Arun Sharma, Doordarshan News, Washington, D.C.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi said that India has always seen humanity as one family and is ready to work with the world to end the pandemic. Delivering remarks at the Global COVID Summit virtually hosted by US President Joe Biden, Prime Minister also said that there is a need to focus on addressing the pandemic economic effects. While US President Joe Biden said US will buy 500 million more COVID-19 vaccine doses to donate to other countries.
Art can bring joy, it can also be poignant and reflective, and that's what we see out here in Washington, D.C. right before the Washington Memorial. This is an art piece which has been dedicated to all the victims of COVID in the United States. The artist here believes that a lot of people, their lives could have been saved had the US followed a different model of tackling COVID-19. But now, of course, there's no time to rule the losses. One still has to look to the future, which is why President Joe Biden is organizing a global vaccine summit.
India stands ready to work with the world to end the pandemic.
The COVID-19 pandemic is not over yet. Much of the world is still to be vaccinated. Prime Minister Narendra Modi made it clear that India stands to work with the world to end the pandemic. Delivering his remarks at the Global COVID-19 Summit hosted by US President Joe Biden, the Prime Minister said that India has always seen humanity as one family. Earlier this year, India shared its vaccine production with 95 other countries and with UN peacekeepers. The Prime Minister said that as production increases, India will be able to resume vaccine supply to others as well.
As newer Indian vaccines get developed, we are also ramping up production capacity of existing vaccines. As our production increases, we will be able to resume vaccine supply to others too. For this, the supply chains of raw materials must be kept open. With our Quad partners, we are leveraging India's manufacturing strength to produce vaccines for the Indo-Pacific region.
Prime Minister said that India is now running the world's largest vaccination campaign. Recently, India vaccinated about 25 million people on a single day. India's grassroots level healthcare system has delivered over 800 million vaccine doses so far. Over 200 Indians are now fully vaccinated.
Our grassroots level healthcare system had delivered over 800 million vaccine doses so far. Over 200 million Indians are now fully vaccinated. This has been enabled through the use of our innovative digital platform called CoWIN.
The Prime Minister said that there is also a need to focus on addressing the pandemic economic effects. To that end, international travel should be made easier through mutual recognition of vaccination certificates.
India and the South Africa have proposed a TRIPS waiver at the WTO for COVID vaccines, diagnostic and medicines. This will enable rapid scaling up of the fight against the pandemic. We also need to focus on addressing the pandemic economic effects. To that end, international travel should be made easier through mutual recognition of vaccine certificates.
While the US on its part promised to buy 500 million more COVID-19 vaccine doses to donate to other countries, the additional vaccines will bring US donations to the rest of the world to more than 1.1 billion doses. Joe Biden said that the US is working to scale up vaccine manufacturing in other countries. Quad partnership is on track to help produce at least 1 billion vaccine doses in India to boost the global supply by end of 2022.
Now we're working quickly to scale up vaccine manufacturing in other countries around the world. Our Quad partnership with India, Japan, and Australia is on track to help produce at least 1 billion vaccine doses in India.
The virtual global COVID-19 summit was convened by US President Joe Biden on the margins of the UN General Assembly. The 4-hour virtual summit was attended by leaders from Canada, Indonesia, South Africa, and Britain, as well as the World Health Organization chief.
The WHO and the UN have to really take the lead in ensuring that everything is well coordinated, the money coming in, the vaccines being produced in good numbers, in which India can hugely contribute. It has the capacities to do that, and India has said that it will reopen export of vaccines, even donations. With camera-person Smriti Ranjan, this is Gautam Roy in Washington, D.C. for DD India.
Well, for more on that particular development there, especially when it comes to the Prime Minister's visit, we got our correspondent Gautam Roy standing by in Washington, D.C. to give us the latest, especially when it comes to day one of the Prime Minister's agenda. Gautam, good morning here, good night there almost. But looking at the way things stand, how do you look at the Prime Minister's visit, especially from a Washington perspective? What's all in store today?
Well, quite a lot. It's going to be a power-packed day as soon as it dawns, because the PM is starting his day early around 9:40 with those presentations from the Fortune 500 company CEOs and top honchos, and they cover a very wide range from Qualcomm, which is a maker of semiconductors and chips and a major competitor of Huawei, to Blackstone, which is an investment firm which has tens of thousands of crores of rupees to invest and are looking to make a good profit on the investment of its contributors, and India is then a very good destination for that particular end.
Right. Also, Gautam, we, of course, are living through a pandemic and therefore there are restrictions everywhere in the world. But when Prime Minister landed, there was a small batch of Indian diaspora welcoming him. The crowd was smaller, but the energy no different from earlier times.
Well, certainly, Shubhendu, that is the kind of appreciation and the kind of joy that the Prime Minister really brings to the Indian diaspora in particular in almost all parts of the world where Indians have migrated and settled down. And the US, of course, has one of the largest, if not the largest, Indian diaspora community, 4.2 million strong, and getting stronger by the day. So many students keep coming in as well, and at the same time you have very good immigration numbers. We have a very large quota in terms of the immigrants who want to come and settle down in the US after having worked here for years, and that is a very long queue, and that is also an issue that Prime Minister Modi might be taking up with President Biden.
Right. We caught glimpses of Gautam of the Global COVID Summit. How is the pandemic, the challenge, going to be an overarching theme in the days ahead, whether it's Quad or UNGA that Prime Minister participates in?
Well, there's no two ways about it, Shubhendu. It's completely unavoidable. And when you have the capacity to respond to this kind of a crisis, this kind of a crying need of the people to get vaccinated in not just poor, underdeveloped countries, but also even in the richer, more developed countries, because the problem there in these countries is that a large number of people just don't want to take the shots. They're uncertain, or they are complete anti-vaxxers. And these people need to be told that they need to get the shot, because that's the best kind of protection that they can get, and they cannot be misled by whatever people might be saying on social media sometimes, that these vaccines can have really bad side effects, although even celebrities have said it and have had to eat their own words later on, but that's the way things are. And the goal now with this this vaccine summit or COVID-19 summit, as Joe Biden spelled out, is to get at least 70% of the entire world vaccinated by 2022 end. And that end can really be served well by India, which is the pharmacy of the world. We've shown the kind of capacity that we have for making these vaccines. Right now, just 2 candidates that India is making indigenously, but very soon more will be added. There will be Russia Sputnik V5 or Sputnik V, and there will also be the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which I believe BioNTech will be making.
Okay, Gautam, I'll ask you to hold your thoughts there. We've got 2 special guests joining us this morning. We've got Vishnu Prakash, former senior diplomat, joining us this morning. Also, we've got Professor Swarna Singh joining us this morning to take us through, foreign affairs expert joining us to take us through the dynamics of this particular visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi to the United States. Coming first to Vishnu Prakash. Sir, how would you look at this particular visit? Purely in terms of, we heard about, the opening meeting that he's having today with the top CEOs of the country. How do you see this potential, considering the fact that we've had the highest FDI coming into India? Do you see a fallout of that, and do you see more and more, there is an opportunity space that, every company is looking forward to when it comes to investing in India?
A very good morning. First of all, it's always amazing to see the kind of euphoric welcome that Prime Minister receives wherever he goes. Also, despite the COVID restrictions, his program is completely action-packed, and it is but apt in fitness of things that one of his key meetings are going to be with the CEOs of Fortune 500 companies, because India is the future, India is the present. The kind of opportunities that India offers, not for a short term, but not medium term, but the long term, are exceptional, given our size, given our potential, and the growth trajectory that we are on. So our economy has bounced back. We have had a good spike in the growth rate, and as the CEO was saying, newer sectors are opening up, newer opportunities are opening up, and that is what is business all about. And it is no mean achievement that in a year when globally the investments have gone down by 25%, India gets 10% more, or something like $82 billion of FDI. I mean, this is something that shows what India is capable of and the confidence that the international business community has in India. So this is a very good portent. We need to continue on this path because at the end of the day, there are three things that matter for a nation: economic development, and economic development. And I'm happy to see and say that we are very much on the growth path.
Right. Professor Swaran Singh, if I can come to you, sir. Prime Minister's visit is taking place at a very, very critical juncture, both as far as the region and the world is concerned. There is the Afghanistan crisis that has introduced new threats in the Indo-Pacific region. Then there is a pandemic in which we are in a very crucial stage, every country doing its best. How do you see with these priorities, Prime Minister's visit gains greater importance?
Clearly, the pandemic, the focus on Indo-Pacific, and now Taliban taking over power in Afghanistan, all these three make India unusually significant as to how the world has to tackle these three challenges that they face. So in that sense, India being present in Washington, D.C., with Prime Minister Modi being there, attracts sufficient attention, not just in United States, but I'm sure beyond the United States as well, because India is seen as a major player in that sense. And as Ambassador Vishnu Prakash just mentioned, India is also emerging as a very significant destination for investments. So in multiple ways, I think there is a reason why India is becoming more important and why India is being engaged very differently. And very quickly, I think it's important to see how on the ground Indian diaspora also increasingly plays a very attractive role, making the presence of Indian Prime Minister far more effective and visible. Since 1980, for example, India's total population has doubled. But if you look at the number of Indians in United States during the same period, that has risen by about 12 or 13 times. So United States has also been a major destination for people of Indian origin and Indian citizens. And they have brought about enormous professional, educational, and financial success for themselves, making them not just visible, but also far more effective in terms of increasingly showcasing their participation and, in fact, leadership in United States politics. And we notice that there are Indians who are greatly celebrated in United States today. President Joe Biden's speechwriter is an Indian. Vice President also is of an Indian origin. So India is in many ways becomes far more visible and desired country to engage for United States. And that, I think, is really going to redefine how India's comprehensive global strategic partnership has been conceived and what it can bring to the table. And I think repeatedly now mention is being made of how India can be a greater contributor to the global supply chains and production lines, particularly in areas like sort of semiconductors. Mention was made of supply chains for raw materials for vaccines. So India is increasingly coming to the center stage in that sense, and the United States fully understands that. And it is also clearly underlined how before Prime Minister undertook his visit to United States, President Macron decided to have a long conversation on phone with Indian Prime Minister. He's not spoken as yet to the US President so far. So I think in that sense, again, how other nations value India in that sense of a country to engage with can be seen in multiple ways. And I think that makes Prime Minister's visit to United States, and particularly I assume his joining the Quad summit and addressing the UN General Assembly, particularly an event of global proportions.
Okay. Ambassador Prakash, how do you see the relationship, especially going forward, between Joe Biden and Narendra Modi?
Both of them are seasoned political leaders. Both of them have met each other 2014, 2016, when Mr. Biden was the vice president. And since Mr. Biden became the president, they have had a number of virtual interactions. So, A, there is familiarity. B, there is a convergence of national interests. So these two are a very good combination, a very strong combination for the relationship to barrel forward. And these two leaders have a lot of mutual admiration. They have a broad convergence of outlook. So I am quite confident that their meeting will be very productive, meeting will be constructive, forward-looking, and the trajectory of India-US relations, which has been going up and up, we do not have with any country the kind of broad-based relationship that we have with the US. You name it, whether it's economic or cultural or educational or security, cyber security, energy, innovation. So we have a very strong relationship, and not just the bilateral, but when it comes to South Asia, when it comes to the Indo-Pacific, when it comes to the world view, we have a growing convergence of interest, and that is the locomotive for any relationship to go forward.
Right. Also, Ambassador Prakash, we witnessed a dramatic change in stance of America under Biden in the way in which it is willing to engage with its allies, make new allies, focus on the Indo-Pacific. We see America's engagement in global climate initiative has also transformed. There is a commitment for higher contribution for developing countries. Is this a new Biden's America that India is dealing with, and what are the implications for it for the road ahead?
There is, in all these areas that you have mentioned, there is a strong commitment of the Biden administration to walk the talk. Now, as you rightly said, whether it's climate change, whether it is to deal with the pandemic, or to look at the Indo-Pacific region, or the commitment to Quad, the very fact that within 2 months of assuming office, President Biden had convened a virtual Quad summit says a lot. The very fact that although it has caused heartburns in certain capitals, the way the Biden administration has gone in with the AUKUS deal, security arrangement, I think is quite significant. It sends out a message where the message needs to be sent, that the world is not ready to accept the aggressive behavior of rising power. So I am quite sanguine that, and the one big difference between the Biden administration and the Trump administration is that the Trump administration was very vocal. They spoke loudly, but the Biden administration uses softer words. They have been talking about the fact that they want to engage with everybody, but they will do what is in the national interest. And fortunately, where national interests converge, like India and the US national interests converge, and there is that determination to re-establish the American leadership, re-establish the rule of law, push back at divisive forces, aggressive forces, that these are good indications.
Professor Singh, how do you see the relationship, especially between the two countries, right in the last 2 decades, right from, say, Obama to Trump to now Biden?
Who is this question for?
Professor Singh.
Sorry, can you repeat your question?
I said, how do you see the relationship going forward in the last 2 decades, considering from the time of Obama to Trump to now Biden?
Sure. Clearly, last 2 decades have seen, first of all, United States drifting from European focus to Indo-Pacific focus, because after collapse of Soviet Union and the fact that the Indo-Pacific littoral is the area where economies were growing much faster, and there was much likelihood of per dollar returns for investors around the world. So, and China's rise was another challenge. So factors like collapse of Soviet Union, rise of China, and rise of economies in this region has brought United States from Obama time to focus on this region, which is where India is a large economy, rapidly developing economy with a huge sort of middle class here as consumers. So India has become both an attractive destination to invest and also important partner to participate in United States, ensuring that it is able to restrain China's kind of unrestricted rising footprint in that larger Indo-Pacific region. Bilaterally, of course, also relationship has almost transformed completely, with 4 foundational agreements being signed, 2+2 mechanism of the defense and foreign ministers meeting annually. The last meeting happened in last November, for example. So the speed and scale of India-US relationship has completely transformed itself in the last 2 decades. And that showcases how increasingly they are building much more closer proximity. And as Ambassador just mentioned, sometimes it doesn't go very well with some of the neighboring countries of India, but that is what it is. And in that sense, I think what is important to underline here is that it's not just anymore limited to bilateral relations. United States and India today work together in various regional and global issues. Pandemic is one important issue. Terrorism is another important. Climate change is another issue where India has taken initiatives of International Solar Alliance, for example. So United States is engaging India not just at bilateral level, which is of great significance and it's transformed, but increasingly sees India as a partner at regional and global level. And I think that is where there's a completely new kind of equation that India for the first time now shares with the United States. And that will be clearly reflected in how India engages both at the Quadrilateral Security Framework Summit meeting on Friday, how India's Prime Minister speaks to the UN General Assembly, and bilateral meetings with all various leaders during this visit to United States. So it's a very different kind of India that United States sees and wants to develop as a close partner of United States in ensuring United States global leadership. As Joe Biden repeatedly now says, America is back. So when America is back, it has to work with its allies and partners. And in those, I think India has really catapulted itself to be a very significant player and partner of United States in addressing all various issues that are challenges for the world.
Right.
And particularly, pandemic has highlighted what India can bring to the table as a pharmacy of the world. And in that sense, I think it's a very different kind of India that is today being looked upon by international community, which has great expectations from India.
Right. For a moment, if you can just go across live to Washington, where our correspondent Gautam Roy continues to be with us, getting us all the latest updates. Gautam, just a reflection on the high-level delegation traveling with Prime Minister. There is External Affairs Minister, NSA, talks volumes about the kind of focus there would be minutely in all the issues related to security and strategy going ahead.
Yes, certainly. Foreign Secretary is also with the delegation that the Prime Minister is leading, and it just speaks to the kind of issues that could be addressed as part of this bilateral meeting that Prime Minister Modi will have with President Joe Biden. They're first with Joe Biden as the President of USA, not to mention that there is a bilateral scheduled with Kamala Harris as well, the Vice President of the US, where the Prime Minister said that he would like to take up a range of issues, including science and tech. And if you just speak about the kind of cooperation that India has ongoing with the US in purely science and tech, it extends across GPS data and satellites and NASA and ISRO working together to pure sciences research as well, which has got a lot of applications in varied fields, from the internet to quantum electronics and as well as semiconductors.
Well, Gautam, before I let you go, one quick word, does all these form of engagements that India has with the US, does it, confront both an opportunity as well as a challenge for, a country like India?
Like, I'm sorry, like which one?
I said, all forms of engagement that India has with the US, does it present an opportunity as well as a challenge?
Well, it does, because in some areas there are challenges that exist which need to be surmounted. If you look at how trade has gone between India and the US back in 2015, when Barack Obama had come as the chief guest on Republic Day, a lot of agreements had been signed. I think around 20 of them agreements as well as MOUs, and one of the goals that was set was that by 2020 India and the US will have trade worth over $500 billion. Now we know what happened after that. Till a certain time things stayed on course, and then after that there was Donald Trump's presidency, and he wanted to make America great, and it was a bit inward looking. He triggered off a trade war with China as well, had some issues with India too, so things didn't make the kind of progress that they were expected to. But now we have Joe Biden coming into the White House, and things are getting once again on course. Already the level of trade between India and the US is $150 billion, and today I was speaking to USIBC chief Nisha Biswal, and she was saying that if we address these issues that have been identified by the Quad, like vaccines, like climate change, which has a lot of allied economic activity going along with it, especially in green tech areas. Also, if we meet the challenge of getting enough critical technologies going between India and the US as well, there's the basket of goods and services that is traded can be enlarged to the extent that in a span of another 5 years we might get to that $500 billion target.
Right there, Gautam, thanks very much for joining us with all those updates from Washington. It's going to be just midnight in Washington now. Thanks very much for being with us. And let me turn to you, Ambassador Vishnu Prakash. There was a lot of anticipation in the run-up to the Quad meeting that is going to come up ahead. But last week also, some of us were surprised with this new grouping that came into being, the AUKUS deal. Australia, UK and the US. Now, Foreign Secretary in his press briefing has clearly said that, look, don't see Quad and AUKUS in the same frame. They're not related. India does not have a stake in AUKUS. However, given the sort of focus that both the groupings have in the Indo-Pacific, and they seem similar, ensuring peace, inclusive, open Indo-Pacific region. In what ways do you think these groupings, their priorities could converge? And the second part of my question, the kind of importance then that lies with Indo-Pacific in the 21st century?
Well, first, the second part of your question, yes. Indo-Pacific is where the action is. The center of gravity shifting is already shifted. Why shifting to the Indo-Pacific region? It is the driving force in every respect. So Indo-Pacific is the name of the game, so to say. Now, moving to the first part of your question, and here the Foreign Secretary is right in that there is no direct relationship between AUKUS and the Quad. But what is AUKUS about? AUKUS is about security. AUKUS is about pushing back or thwarting the aggressive ambitions of a rising power, which is not just rising, but is wanting to create a China-centric world order where the rule of law is to be supplanted in their scheme of things by rule of power. And you cannot keep bullying any and every country because Australia has asked for transparency in the origin of COVID. The reaction was so harsh, as if you had, treaded on the toes of or the pride of a country, so much so that some experts said that Australia is like the chewing gum which is stuck on the sole of the Chinese shoe. Now, all kinds of interference are taking place. So obviously, countries will react. And Australia was left with no choice, given the bullying, to strengthen its security. Now, where is the relationship? The relationship is that Australia is one of the key members of one of the 4 key members of Quad. A stronger Australia, Australia which has more wherewithal, both defensive capabilities and the capabilities of thwarting aggression, means a stronger Quad. So it is but natural that Australia, which is more confident, which is stronger, is good for the Quad. And Prime Minister Scott Morrison has shown the ability, rare ability, to stand up to a bully and say, look, you cannot push us any further. So to that extent, I think it's a positive development for Quad also. But the message that has to go out loud and clear to China, that if they think that they can keep on pushing each country, they can wage aggression, they can eye the territory of other countries. Other countries are not sitting idle. The world is going to react.
Okay, Professor Singh, when one looks at trade and investment perspective, another important pillar when it comes to bilateral ties, how is that going to move forward?
I think we have a largest trade between United States and India. Of course, within that trade, a lot need to be rectified, and that can really push it forward. But investments I think, is a major focus now, with the sort of Make in India being a primary focus of India. India is interested in bringing more and more investments, particularly high technology investments into India. And that is why Prime Minister is meeting a whole lot of CEOs of top companies in the United States in his first leg of the visit. But within those investments, I think there are areas where India needs to particularly stress need to sort of implement some of the promises that have been made, and that would be cheap, clean, and renewable energy area, which is very critical for India's development and growth in future. And we had
ब्रेक बोलने का मतलब क्या?
All right, welcome back to this special presentation. It's a non-stop coverage of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the United States. We continue our coverage and focus on various aspects of the village. But first, the top stories at this hour.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi arrives in Washington, D.C. for a 4-day U.S. visit. Despite rains, exuberant members of Indian diaspora welcome the Prime Minister with chants of Modi, Modi. PM Modi describes the diaspora as India's strength.
Prime Minister Modi to interact with leading CEOs to highlight economic opportunities in India, to hold bilateral meetings with Australian and Japanese counterparts, to also meet US Vice President Kamala Harris.
Ahead of PM's interaction with CEOs, US-India Business Council President Nisha Biswal speaks exclusively to DD India, says India can be a driver for global economic recovery and in boosting trade and commerce. Highlights India's sustained and record FDI despite COVID pandemic.
Team DD India brings all the action from ground zero in Washington, D.C. and in New York.
I'll get you all the updates from Washington, D.C. This is Gautam Roy.
World leaders gather in New York. I'll bring you the latest news and updates.
Camera person Smriti Ranjan, Arun Sharma, Doordarshan News, Washington, D.C.
Prime Minister Modi addresses the global COVID-19 summit hosted by US President Joe Biden. PM stresses on pushing through TRIPS waiver at WTO for COVID vaccines, diagnostics and medicine. President Joe Biden says Quad partnership is on track to help produce at least 1 billion vaccine doses in India by the end of 2022. Pledges over 1.1 billion doses for the world.
External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar participates in the G20 meeting on Afghanistan, says Taliban must not be allowed to use Afghan soil for terrorism. Foreign ministers of G4 countries also meet during the 76th session of UNGA in New York. Jaishankar stresses upon Security Council to become more legitimate, effective and representative.
Well, those are the headlines at the top of this hour. Now for the Prime Minister's non-stop coverage there as he lands in the United States of America. Prime Minister Narendra Modi landed in Washington, D.C. this morning. Prime Minister was greeted on arrival by the Ambassador of India to United States, Taranjit Singh Sandhu, and U.S. Deputy Secretary of State for Management and Resources, T.H. Brian McCon. Over the next 2 days, Prime Minister Modi will be meeting U.S. President Joe Biden and Vice President Kamala Harris, along with Prime Minister Scott Morrison from Australia and Suga from Japan. He will also attend the Quad meeting and would also interact with leading CEOs to highlight economic opportunities in India. This is the first transatlantic visit by Prime Minister Narendra Modi since COVID-19 pandemic broke out. Well, that's going to be our top focus there, especially when it comes to the Prime Minister's visit to the United States. The Prime Minister has already landed there. He's got a series of meetings that's lined up today. He's meeting the top CEOs, the top 5 CEOs of Fortune 500 companies there, joining the Prime Minister for a discussion this morning, followed by bilateral meetings that he has with the Australian Prime Minister and the Japanese Prime Minister. Lots to look forward to. Let's take a look at the key events that are scheduled for the day.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi touched down in Washington, D.C. on his first transcontinental visit and his second foreign visit since the COVID pandemic.
to see my beloved Prime Minister, Mr. Modi. We are so excited. We don't mind staying in the rain. It is very instrumental in bringing US-India ties much more stronger. Only he is the leader who can solve the situations in the world.
The second leg will see him in New York to attend the 76th session of the United Nations General Assembly. From the first bilateral meeting with President Joe Biden and leaders of the Quad countries to participation in the Quad Summit and his address to the UNGA. It's a high-power, action-packed agenda. This will be the first in-person bilateral meeting between the two leaders since President Biden took office. Previously, Prime Minister Narendra Modi had met Joe Biden, who was then the Vice President in the Obama administration, during his visit to the USA in 2014 and in 2016, when he chaired the joint session of the US Congress.
The leaders have been in regular contact in recent months. The Prime Minister has also participated in 3 major conferences and summits with President Biden as a participant. These were the Quad Leaders Summit, which was virtually held in March this year. This was also the Climate Leaders Summit, which President Biden has hosted. Both these summits were hosted by President Biden. But they also participated in the G7 summit. The Prime Minister attended virtually in Cornwall in the UK.
The last 2 decades, the relationship between the United States and India has been heading in positive and upward direction. In fact, in the first 100 days of Biden administration, we have had intensive interactions between our 2 democratic polities. This is despite all the pressures of COVID and the limitations that have been placed by it. So at least 3 times both the leaders spoke to each other. There were 2 summits, one on climate and one the first Quad virtual summit, in which Prime Minister Modi had a prominent place, and he addressed and expressed his presence there.
On September 23, Prime Minister will also meet Prime Minister Morrison of Australia and Prime Minister Suga of Japan to take stock of the strong bilateral relations with their respective countries and continue useful exchanges on regional and global issues. On the same day, Prime Minister will also hold a meeting with select CEOs of global companies. US-India bilateral trade in goods and services reached $149 billion in 2019.
The corporate sector is keenly observing this visit of Prime Minister Narendra Modi as to how India and US can come forward and can create a better trade and investment regime, because all eyes will be on the Prime Minister Narendra Modi and of course US President Joe Biden as to how can a better investment regime or the trade regime can be created so that India's Atmanirbhar Bharat and Make in India initiative can also get a major push.
Arun Sharma's report, DD India.
And ahead of Prime Minister's interaction with CEOs, US-India Business Council President Nisha Biswal spoke exclusively to DD India. She said India can be a driver for global economic recovery and in boosting trade and commerce. She also highlighted that despite COVID pandemic, India has sustained and record FDI.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit to the US this time around, building up a lot of anticipation, especially among the business world, people looking towards both the economies to ensure that the world progresses forward from this pandemic era into one of rapid growth. And Nisha Biswal is with us, USIBC chief, to tell us how exactly will that happen. Nisha, just tell us in terms of the kind of priorities that the 2 leaders have shown. President Biden, it's just been a little over 100 days of his presidency, and Prime Minister Modi, of course, going back to 2014. And this relationship, how do you feel it will progress through the next few years? Because we're still in that phase when we're trying to fight this battle against coronavirus.
Well, look, I think what we have shown is that the United States and India are integral to all of the big global challenges that we're seeking to address today, whether it's battling this pandemic and ensuring that India's enormous capacity to produce vaccines and life-saving medical technology is maximized in the fight against the coronavirus. And I think we will see, you know, in the battle on combating climate change and on really ensuring that our global institutions are up to the task of the 21st century that the U.S. and India relationship is going to be very important.
Especially with the Quad, the activities that have been peaked, the Quad has been elevated, and more and more economic activities will open. You'll have fresh baskets available to expand. Do you feel that that is something, again, that will give a lot of boost to business on both sides?
Absolutely. Look, I think the Quad has shown itself to be a very important and consequential platform, focused not just on strategic issues, but frankly on, how we can usher in the technologies and usher in the opportunities for the nations of the Indo-Pacific. Our four democracies are working together to ensure that we can have the collaboration in areas such as education, such as clean technology and finance, and in the tools and technologies that will help us to combat climate change. We're also looking at kind of the future economy and how we can collaborate on 5G, how we can collaborate on secure supply chains, and other ways of ensuring that we continue to see an Indo-Pacific that is free and open and that continues to be the source of innovation and progress and opportunity for the world.
And finally, in terms of how this entire bilateral relationship is moving forward, it's vision that really matters as well. And you have two leaders with great vision, especially for the progress of their countries. And when you're talking about resilience, there has to be this intent as well. And do you see that coming through in the leadership on both sides? And you have Vice President Harris also in the mix now.
Look, I think that there is enormous vision in both countries and in both leaders, both governments. And what I think we need to do is make sure that we are focused on execution of that vision. The devil is in the details. And so as we look to deepen our strategic and economic partnership, there needs to be a focus on trade. There needs to be a focus on aligning the policies and the regulatory environment so that we can see the execution of the ambitious vision that both leaders have put forward.
India has been doing that on its end. We've seen Prime Minister Modi come out with the PLI scheme. The retrospective tax has been done away with. Those are some of the two major steps that will make a difference?
Absolutely. Those are very important steps, and I think that we're starting to see more and more of an openness in India on a trade relationship and a trade agreement with the United States, and we want to see the United States reciprocate on that. We have to prioritize these things, and I think that's where both leaders can make enormous progress.
2014, you were part of the administration. The goal was $500 billion. We're at $150 billion right now. Do you think that's still a realistic goal? It's just the pandemic that got in the way, and perhaps a little bit of make America great again.
It is absolutely a realistic goal. We will get there. The question is, will we get there in 2 decades? Will we get there in a decade? Will we get there in 5 years? I think it's possible within 5 years if both countries make that a priority and do the requisite steps to really deepen the trade partnership between our two countries.
So we get to know that on the 24th. Thank you so much for joining us right here on DD News. So you heard it from Disha Biswal, $500 billion, the trade goal that was there, that had been set back in 2014. We're at 150 right now. The pandemic got in the way, but we're still on course, and it can happen in the next 5 years. This is Gautam Roy in Washington, D.C. for DD India.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi will participate in the first in-person Quad Leaders Summit along with US President Joe Biden, Prime Minister of Japan Suga and Australian Prime Minister Morrison. The summit provides an opportunity to take stock of the outcomes of the virtual summit in March this year. Here's a report.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi will participate in the first in-person Quad Leaders Summit along with President Biden, Prime Minister Morrison of Australia and Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga of Japan. The summit provides an opportunity to take stock of the outcomes of the virtual summit in March this year and identify priorities for future engagements based on a shared vision for the Indo-Pacific region.
The 3 working groups have been continuously working. So despite it not being visible to everyone, the intensive interactions between the 4 countries has been taking place, and there is a lot of movement ahead on the vaccines front. Soon enough the production of vaccines is beginning in India, and these will be for export purposes, as was indicated in that is the next year. Also on emerging technologies as well as on climate change.
This historic Quad summit marks the coming of age of what began as an informal grouping of 4 powerful nations.
Since the time of its inception, there's been a lot of developments, particularly Afghanistan, and where China fits into that whole scenario. China has literally stepped into the vacuum left by the US in Afghanistan. So I guess India will have a lot of questions about that. I don't see the same level of interest from Japan or Afghanistan, Japan or Australia about it. Their orientation is more the Indo-Pacific region. So there's going to be a lot of they're going to have to reconcile a lot of elements here.
On education, which has both an innovation dimension to it as well as a peoples to peoples dimension. So I think those are the issue areas that you're likely to see the Quad focus on, and what you'll hear about, along with kind of a broader sense from the leaders that they are committed to this idea of working with each other.
In his address at the 76th UN General Assembly debate, President Joe Biden has announced the elevation of the partnership to take on emerging global and regional challenges.
We elevated the Quad partnership among Australia, India, Japan, and the United States to take on challenges ranging from health security to climate to emerging technologies. We're engaging with regional institutions from ASEAN to the African Union to the Organization of American States to focus on people's urgent needs for better health and better economic outcomes.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi will conclude his visit with an address at the United Nations General Assembly focusing on the pressing global challenges, including the COVID-19 pandemic, the need to combat terrorism, climate change, and other important issues.
Also, multilateral reforms of the UN in particular, and the UN Security Council as well. Remember, India is among the handful of countries, including Germany, Japan, and Brazil, who are actually pushing for UNSC reform as quickly as possible. So these are some of the issues that the PM can be expected to raise in his address here at the UNGA come Saturday, 25th September. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran with my camera person Saurabh Shukla in New York for DD India.
And our correspondents are bringing you all the buzz from Ground Zero in Washington as well as New York. Here, Ramesh Ramachandran tells us what all to expect during the course of next 3 days.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is among the 100-odd world leaders who will address the United Nations General Assembly's 76th session here at the UN building right behind me in New York. Now, this would be his second visit to the UNGA in about 2 years. The last time he spoke at the UNGA was in 2019, the year he was re-elected for a second term in office. Now, among the issues the PM can be expected to raise in his address here at the UNGA include COVID-19 pandemic, vaccines. Remember, India decided to resume supply of vaccines to the needy countries in the region and beyond. Also, the issue of global recovery, economic recovery or reboot of the global economy from the pandemic, and also supply chain resilience. Now, this is an issue of immense importance to India because many countries around the world have had an over-dependence on China during the pandemic, and that's had a devastating impact on many economies around the world. Also, multilateral reforms of the UN in particular, and the UN Security Council as well. Remember, India is among the handful of countries, including Germany, Japan, and Brazil, who are actually pushing for UNSC reform as quickly as possible. So these are some of the issues that the PM can be expected to raise in his address here at the UNGA come Saturday, 25th September. I'm Ramesh Ramachandran with my camera person Saurabh Shukla in New York for DD India.
Well, in the first half, we focused on Washington. The second half, let's also take a look at the important engagements in New York. Clearly, most important things that are going to take place, the UNGA, that's going to be one of the significant things. We'll get our experts now to join this particular discussions. 2 experts joining us this morning on our special broadcast. that's non-stop here on Indian Prime Minister's visit to the United States. Ashok Sajjanhar, former senior diplomat, joining us this morning. We also got Atul Aneja, senior journalist covering foreign affairs for us, joining us this morning. Let me come to you first, diplomat sir. How do you look at it, purely from a perspective in today's times when it comes to, is there a need, especially for countries like India, to define more its allies and adversaries in today's times, especially when it wants to increase its footprint in the world?
Well, I think that's a very important question that you posed. Should we be identifying and should we be declaring who our allies and adversaries are? In my view, I think your actions should be able to speak louder than words. Okay. I don't think we really need to be, explicit in so many words in determining who our adversaries are. As far as our allies are concerned, yes, definitely we can be much more forthcoming in that. But, our actions should be there in terms of what is the nature of our partnership, what is the nature of our relationship. That having been said, you see, there are always possibilities that we can have relations. There are areas where we can cooperate with some countries. There would be areas where we might not have, the same position. So I think we need to identify those also. It is a fast-changing world. So I think we need to be very nimble-footed as far as our partnerships are concerned, as far as our relationships are concerned. And, this is what we have seen since we are focusing now on India-US relations. Over the last 20 years, since the time President Bill Clinton came to India in March 2000, our relations have continued the upward trend. That is, of course, not to say that there have been no disagreements, that there have been no areas where we have not seen eye to eye with each other. The most recent one is that of Afghanistan, the manner in which the United States left, that is not something that, is favorable as far as India is concerned, is particularly palatable as far as India is concerned. There are areas of differences, but then we see what are the areas of convergence. And we find that there are many more areas of convergence. So I think under those circumstances, we focus on areas where our interests converge, where we can work together to the benefit of the people of our two countries, for the benefit of peace, security, and stability in our regions and in the world. And I think in that context, both countries need to determine that a strong, dynamic, powerful India is in the interest of the United States, and a strong, confident, and well-respected United States is in the interest of India and the world. So I think those are some of the principles that we need to be aware of, that we need to be conscious about, and we need to take our relationship with the United States and with other countries in the region and beyond.
Right. Atul Aneja, sir, if I can come to you. World leaders are gathering in New York at a very crucial juncture as far as the challenge of the pandemic is concerned. While vaccination drive is on, doing very well in some parts of the country, some parts of the world. In other parts, more attention needs to go into it. There are challenges of inequality, distribution, and others. In such a moment in history, how significant does India's voice, India's presence, India's story become important on the world stage?
I think exceptionally important. And if you really look at the world today, it is a multipolar world. And it is no longer a bipolar or a unipolar world, what happened after the collapse of the Soviet Union. We are in a multipolar era. And among the major poles in this world, I would say India, United States, European Union, China, Russia. Now, to name, I don't think the list is comprehensive, but this is the broad architecture of an emerging multipolar world. I think within that, India is a very significant pole in the global system. So India's voice matters, India's actions matter. You talk specifically about vaccines. I think if we already, during the early stage of the pandemic, established ourselves as the pharmacy of the world when we supplied drugs and medicines to various parts of the globe. But I think we are also have the full potential to become the vaccine headquarters of the world. And I think if we do that, and that seems to be the broad trajectory of what the Quad is likely to focus on, in terms of vaccines being one of them, I think India can play a very major role as a global supplier of vaccines to counter not just COVID-19, which has struck us now, but as a vaccine capital or to face other health challenges which might come downstream. So health and pharma, I think we consolidated as a global player in that. In that context, it's exceptionally important, India's role in the multipolar setting, as I said. But there are other areas as well, and in strategic terms, India's moderate voice, a democratic voice, is exceptionally important for the global system. Because at this time, we are not being challenged just on the economic, commercial, and security. But there is also a big tussle on the ideological play in terms of whether democracy as a system is working, is it efficient, is it going to deliver, especially to the developing world. I think there again, India stands out, because if we can demonstrate that a democratic model is something which works, which delivers, which leads to prosperity, which leads to freedoms of expression and other democratic traditions, I think that's a big contribution on a global scale, because otherwise the counter to that is coming in terms of authoritarian systems. It's coming in terms of radicalism in the world. So I think India's voice is very important on the global scale, not just on one vector, but several vectors, which we can discuss during the course of our discussion.
Okay, Mr. Sajjanar, purely looking at the UNGA address, what could be very much on the table, especially when the Prime Minister speaks?
As Atullah Neja has said very rightly, I think India's voice is heard with respect and, it's become an influential voice as far as global issues are concerned. So I think on this, the most important, the most significant global platform of all, when the Prime Minister speaks, he will be listened to with great interest as to what are the issues. So of course, as far as COVID-19 is concerned, dealing with COVID-19, the vaccines, and I think the Indian experience of it, that how we have been able to deal with, notwithstanding the fact 1.35 billion people, healthcare systems not as robust as in many other countries, particularly the developed countries. But there also, as far as science and technology is concerned, the vaccines that India is manufacturing, how the Vaccine Maitri initiative of India, we supplied more than 66 million vaccines to 90 countries. And now again, starting from next month, which starts in another week, 10 days, we will again be in, as far as the world is concerned, to supply vaccines. You would recall that last time we started the supply of vaccines with our neighborhood, first Bhutan, Maldives on the 20th of January, 21st, it went to Bangladesh and Nepal, and then, all the developing countries, it went to, whether it is to Southeast Asia, Pacific Island countries, to the Gulf, to Africa, to Latin America, Brazil, Dominica. So, how India has been able to deal with this, with the vaccines, and how India's contribution in dealing with COVID-19 is a factor for global security, peace, and good. The other aspect, I think that definitely the Prime Minister is going to raise is about the rise of terrorism, the rise of radicalism, the rise of what has happened in Afghanistan, what the Prime Minister mentioned in his SCO address, that it is not an inclusive government, that the government has been taken over by force, and the world really needs to think about it, reflect on it very closely as to how to take it forward. Then, of course, as far as the economics are concerned, how to deal with the economic issues, because economies all over the world have been affected very severely as a result of this pandemic. Then in terms of the resilience of supply chains, stability and reliability of supply chains, I think he will definitely speak as to the initiatives that India has taken and the results that we have got, whether it is in terms of productivity-linked incentive scheme, whether it is in terms of Atmanirbhar Bharat, or it is some of the other initiatives, GST and some of the other things, IBC code. So definitely, as far as the economy is concerned, that will definitely be a part of it. and definitely how the world needs to come together to deal with all these challenges, and India is ready to play its part in this endeavor.
Right. Diplomat Ashok Sachinhar, sir, while the United Nations is a platform for world leaders to gather and speak about the issues that are in focus, how will this institution of the United Nations, how has it also been attracting attention to itself about its actions, or if I may say the absence of the actions, whether it is the pandemic and the kind of criticism that WHO had to face since 2020, or the Afghanistan crisis, where a global body plays a sort of passive role in addressing the concerns of a crisis that took place in the Indo-Pacific. In that manner, sometimes the reason is said to be the lack of reform that has been due for a long time at the United Nations. And India has spoken in a very clear voice for some time. How significant would that aspect be in this respect?
Oh, absolutely. Very significant, because India has been working towards it in terms of reforming the United Nations. More recently, the Prime Minister has spoken about reformed multilateralism. You would also recall that in 2014, the first time when Prime Minister Modi had gone to address the UN General Assembly, at that time he had spoken about the reform of the UN Security Council, saying that, you know, the structures that had been constructed to promote peace and security in the world had been put in place 70 years ago when the United Nations was first established, and no changes have taken place, while the world is very, very different from what it used to be in 1945. So it was appropriate to recognize the new realities of the world and to make changes in the structures. Now there we have found that countries like China, they have been standing in the way of expansion of the UN Security Council, while there has been much greater support amongst the most members of the international community. But I think definitely as far as reformed multilateralism, and over the last 1 year, 1.5 years, while dealing with the pandemic, the Prime Minister has had occasion to mention it. You would remember that in last year, G20, when the meeting took place, and the Prime Minister said that this was a major hazard to global peace and security, and United Nations was nowhere to be found. So the manner in which the United Nations itself has functioned, the way in which the WHO has functioned, it has not really been able to acquit itself creditably in dealing with this, you know, once in a century challenge to health and peace and security and economies of the world that has taken place. How the WTO has been totally emaciated, how in terms of climate change also the multilateral system has not been able to respond effectively. So this is definitely a reform of the multilateral system, I'm certain is going to occupy a very significant part in Prime Minister Modi's address to the United Nations General Assembly on the 25th.
Mr. Aditya, when one looks at the UNG and UN in particular, and especially when it comes to the Afghan crisis, do you somewhere feel that, you know, now in hindsight, when one looks at it, it could have been better handled? And, you know, is this a time still to introspect and, you know, take steps, corrective steps, you know, so that more damage is not done?
No, I agree with you completely. The Afghan situation has exposed the lack of effective capacity of the Security Council to deal with the crisis of this magnitude, which has got a spillover effect not only in the region, but across the globe. So it's an illustration for reforms of the UN Security Council. I agree completely with Ambassador Sachinhar that reforms does not mean only the reform of the Security Council, which is critical, probably the key, but reform of the entire multilateral system, the entire UN system, starting from WHO onwards, UNHCR, Human Rights Council, everywhere. So the Afghan situation definitely exposes the need for an institution which can effectively respond to these challenges posed by radicalism in Afghanistan, and not just radicalism, the attempt by one country, which is Pakistan, to micromanage a new so-called caretaker government in Afghanistan to expand its geopolitical space in a critical area of the world, which has borders with Central Asia, which has borders with the Middle East, West Asia, as well as South Asia. I think these are situations which require a global response and a rule-based system based on international law, which can address the threat of terrorism and radicalism. I think that is a very, very critical area. And I think that leads to one more point, which is that democratic countries have to bond far more effectively among themselves and together in the UN system as well. I think that's where it becomes very important for democracies to demonstrate that they can deliver, that they are effective and efficient. Because what happens in Afghanistan is also on account of an ideological challenge where perhaps that's not the right word, but the hegemony of the democratic system in the world is being undermined by parallel ideologies which are coming up in forms of either authoritarianism from China or in terms of radicalism coming from states like Pakistan and others. So you need a UN reform which can address these new challenges which are coming up not from one center. Afghanistan demonstrates the multiplicity of challenges which the global system functions and the need for a robust response to counter these challenges from the UN system and from a multilateral system, where India needs to play a very, very significant role.
Right. Atul Aneja, sir, the case for democracy, the issue that you just mentioned, would also feature very importantly in the first leg of Prime Minister's visit, when the Quad meetings take place. Is that important democracies coming together in the Indo-Pacific region, and the challenges that you mentioned, in fact, appear to be concentrated in the region that these four nations are part of?
I completely agree with you that Quad is very significant. I think there are two things here. One is the orientation which the Quad has taken.
Okay.
You see, after COVID-19, the Quad countries, which are four major democracies of the world, in fact, have the capacity to tilt the center of gravity of the global system, have realized that it is not good for the global system to be dependent on one country. What happened with the rise of China was that manufacturing and the global supply chains was so strongly concentrated in China that it gave it excessive leverage in the global system. And that's not healthy for a multipolar world. So I think the Quad democracies realized that apart from security, they need to reorient on an efficient system of economic delivery, of humanitarian supplies like vaccines, like supply chains, technology, AI, and 5G. I mean, these are the cutting edge areas where, unfortunately, the democracy has, in a way, relatively lost out in certain sectors to China. I think it's very important for a balanced global system to emerge, that the Quad gets its act together and focuses on these very, very important issues, including climate change, to show, first of all, that the global system is more balanced and more diverse. And the second thing is that to demonstrate that democracies work and work effectively. If we can show that, the Quad meeting is therefore exceptionally important in more than one sense. Not only that democracies can bring in freedoms, but also prosperity. And B, it's a working system which needs to be, in a way, it needs to be expanded in the global system. I think this will have a very, very important impact on countries in the developing world as well, which are threatened by coups and by radicalism. So I think this Quad is not just what is happening between the four countries. It has a far greater global footprint, and and that too on multi levels, from economy to ideology. So I think in the multipolar system, this is a very important institution which has come around. Happy that the security element somehow has been taken away in a sense from the Quad, because otherwise we were becoming a frontline state called containment of China. I think we are out of it when we are focusing on the civilian dimensions of global concerns. And there's a new institution called AUKUS, which is sort of being the front line if there's a containment of China to be done. I think it's very important that India contributes very strongly in this, because with the Quad and it's getting a more civil orientation, we can go we can go forward with full energy and build on the system. And if China has objections to it, we have the argument that it's nothing to do with you. I mean, you have therefore a new institution which can work without getting caught in this geopolitical trap. Because finally, in the end, my last point is that while we continue with the Quad and others, we are in a multi-pole system. We need a dialogue with the Chinese as well. Now, we know the problem is we can't be dependent on China on critical supplies, but we need a dialogue with them. So with the way the need bifurcation which is being done between Quad and AUKUS, I think it's important that we'll be able to manage to address several poles of the world simultaneously without getting caught in a zero-sum situation.
Okay. Mrs. Sajjanar, you somewhere see, is there going to be a shift, especially when it comes to India's approach in this post-COVID world, purely when it comes to advancing our interests?
Sorry, could you...
I said, do we see a shift in India's approach, especially in this post-COVID world when it comes to, advancing our interests?
Well, I think we have been seeing a shift in our approach. As I mentioned, that our relations with the United States, that has really become the most significant pillar of our foreign policy. That has been growing, over the last 20 years, but I would say particularly over the last 7 years since Prime Minister Modi came to office. Because 2010 to 2014, if I were to put it this way, we had Mr. Barack Obama. He came to India and he said that this is the defining partnership of the 21st century. But after having made that comment and also saying that the United States would support the membership of India as a permanent member of the UN Security Council, nothing much really happened on the ground. And I think it was after the visit of Prime Minister Modi in September 2014 for the UNGA, during which he went to Washington also, which is something very unusual, very rare occurrence. And he had an interaction with President Barack Obama and also met the then Vice President Joe Biden and is able to establish a very strong connect with Vice President Joe Biden. And that followed into the visit of President Obama as the chief guest to our Republic Day in 2014. After that, we have seen a very rapid, notwithstanding the fact that Donald Trump came to power, came to position, and although he, overturned many of the initiatives and many of the policies of Barack Obama, but as far as relations with India are concerned, that has continued to stay, have stayed a priority. And the same thing we are now witnessing during the period of Joe Biden as the president. So this is definitely in terms of how we have moved forward, becoming an STA1 member of the United States, Strategic Trade Authorization 1, major defense partner, signing all the foundational agreements, and the United States becoming the second largest defense supplier, also transfer of technology as far as defense is concerned, becoming our biggest trading partner, $149 billion in 2019, if we include both goods and services. So United States is a very important story in terms of our foreign policy. Similarly, we have seen, I think there has been a strategic clarity as far as our relations with China are concerned. And that has emerged as the most significant challenge. And this, I think all credit goes to China for, both strengthening our relations with the United States and also, removing the cobwebs from in front of our eyes while dealing with the Quad is concerned. And so I think after Galwan, last year and before that to some extent Doklam in 2017, I think there has become much greater strategic clarity as to how we need to deal with China. As far as Pakistan is concerned, whether it is post-Uri in September 2016 or post-Pulwama and Balakot in February 2019, I think there also the message has gone out very clearly that terror and talks don't go together. Then we have, given much greater energy and push to our Act East policy. From Look East of 1992, in 2014, we transformed it to Act East. So our relations with ASEAN, not only in trade, but also Japan, Australia, New Zealand, I think that has got much greater traction. That having been said, the last 2 points I'll make is our relations with the Gulf countries. And they have become much more strategic. You would recall the largest country in that region, Saudi Arabia. Our contacts and our visits have been few and far in between. You know, Prime Minister Nehru in the 1950s, then 1980s. We had Mrs. Indira Gandhi, 2006, Dr. Manmohan Singh, the King of Saudi Arabia, 2010, Manmohan Singh. But here, over the last 3-4 years, Prime Minister Modi has traveled twice to that country. All the major countries have awarded Prime Minister Modi with their, the highest awards. I think India is one of the few countries having excellent relations with Israel, with Saudi Arabia, with UAE, and with Iran. So that also, I think, is a great success story, because we have 8-9 million of our diaspora. We have more than 50% of our remittances, our energy coming in from there. And last but not the least, Russia. I think Russia also we have, although in terms of its move towards China after 2014, when the Ukraine crisis erupted and the referendum in Crimea, etc., and sanctions put on Russia. So there also we have tried to take our relationship, put it on an even keel, and maintain the substantive content of a special and privileged strategic partnership. So I think across the board, our foreign policy and diplomacy has been extremely nimble-footed and responding to the challenges of times as they are erupting. First, rise of China. Now we see here, in terms of radicalization and terrorism, extremism in Afghanistan. So I think India is connecting with all its major partners and stakeholders in promoting its interests, safeguarding its interests, and promoting peace and security.
Right. Mr. Neja, what you said earlier about the kind of dynamics that exist between India and China. Also, just in the context of the future of multilateralism, there are so many platforms in which India and China also engage with one another. So if you're talking about Quad, as of now, we also have India and China and SCO, BRICS, G20 and so on. Just to understand, how do these multidimensional platforms coexist? Because in one platform we are cooperating, in another platform quite openly countries are checking the hegemonic rise of a particular country.
Well, you see, there is no zero-sum approach anymore. There are lines where you agree and lines where you disagree. I think fundamental clarity, which Ambassador Sajinar was referring to, comes from a basic doctrine of strategic autonomy, that we are India-centric. There are areas, as in the present visit shows, we have commonalities with the Americans, with the Japanese, I think in the future with the Koreans big time, with the Asian democracies. But at the same time, because we exercise strategic autonomy, we have excellent relationship with Russia, which might come into bearing, especially on the situation in Central Asia and Afghanistan. And then we have a major problem with China, and that is a security issue, which is actually the dominant one. But at the same time, the lines of communication with the Chinese are also open. And just to recall, while we have had this border standoff going on for a very long time now, yet the military dialogue continued, and you had Foreign Minister Jaishankar meeting Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi very recently in Dushanbe. So you see that the communication is on. Engagement has to be maintained. Engagement does not mean agreement. But if you block communication, then you deprive yourself of possible opportunities which can come on the way. Because the situation is fluid and dynamic, and opportunities can arise any time. So the lines of communication have to be kept open. Then when we look at the world, the new multipolar system is coming. You Eurasia is exceptionally important. The emerging economies are very important. And there you have an area of commonality with China, whether it comes in the New Development Bank, which is essentially funding projects in the emerging economies in the BRICS, and in the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, because we need a foot in the door as well in Eurasia on a multilateral level. So I think I agree with Ambassador Satna that we are comfortable, that we know ideologically where we stand. We have clarity now, and we have lines of engagement with everybody. Now the challenge really arises: how much to go with whom? What are the red lines where you can not agree, and what are the lines you can agree? I think that's something, once you have the big picture in mind and you are clear about your doctrine, it's not that hard to define. So there will be certain areas where you will agree, and there will, in the case of China, a lot of areas we disagree.
Okay.
This whole equation with China of decoupling the security from the economy, I think after Galwan incident, that's gone, and I think our message has been consistent with China, that if you want normalization, then you got to resolve at least the tensions, restore status quo ante, if not resolve the border with us, for the economy to flow. So I think that, again, is an important message which is being sent with China, while we continue to talk to the Chinese, whether bilaterally or in a multilateral format. I think this is the way forward in a very fluid and dynamic global system.
Okay, Mr. Sajjanar, I'll give you the final word. How does one look at it? How does China want to be a part of this Afghanistan story? Is it there just to bring about stability, or do they want more out of it? Secondly, looking at China, it's been a 360 turnaround for them, considering the fact that the heat that they were facing in the pandemic, to now being a part and parcel, or of being a part of that Afghanistan story. Have things changed dramatically for China in the last, say, 6 to 8 months?
Well, not really. I will not, go to the extent of saying that things have changed dramatically. That is what the Chinese would like to believe.
Okay.
That is what they have been trying to work towards. But I think they are really in a very tight spot so far. They have not really been able to extricate themselves. And I think the challenge there is that for them, maintaining security and peace in Xinjiang, in the East Turkestan region, that is of paramount importance. They know that there are elements, there are remnants of East Turkestan Islamic movement in Afghanistan. So basically, the purpose of reaching out to the Taliban through Pakistan was to ensure that the Taliban will be able to control the ETIM elements and not allow them to work, not allow them to come into Xinjiang. I have my very serious doubts that they will be able to succeed in this, that they will be able to accomplish this. Secondly, they have basically been using Pakistan to reach out to Afghanistan, basically in terms of extending the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, the Belt Road Initiative, so that they can exploit all the natural resources that are available, whether it is rare earth minerals like lithium, whether it is copper or iron ore or the other things. And if they are able to get access through Afghanistan to Iran and to West Asia and Europe, that will be the shortest route. So this is their game plan. I have very serious doubts that they will be able to succeed, because we have seen Taliban is no longer in control. Even even Pakistan is not in control. So I don't think China has been banking upon Pakistan. So I think they are going to, their intentions are going to come a cropper, and they are going to be very seriously disappointed and disillusioned.
Right. Mr. Aneja, just in brief, final thoughts from you. The earlier conversation about UNSC reforms in particular, well, when an institution does not recognize a worthy member, the worthy member must talk about one's achievements and the contributions that one has done. In that sense, how does India's work, contribution to the global well-being speak for itself, whether it's a vaccine, whether it's climate change initiatives and agenda setting, or in fact the data that I just learnt about the peacekeeping forces? India contributes in fact one of the largest peacekeeping forces to the United Nations. How has India's time come, according to you, at the UNSC?
There is no need for us to prove our credentials of our value in the global system. And facts speak for themselves. I think we need to be diplomatically very proactive. Of course, it's important to build, to demonstrate what we have done. But I think the case is exceptionally strong, both India in terms of power terms and in terms of its global responsibilities. If you look at it, let's take the example of the global tsunami, the Asian tsunami, which took place way back in 2004. I mean, that's where we demonstrated that Indian Navy could help in HADR, humanitarian assistance and disaster relief, right up to Indonesia, from our borders to Sri Lanka. I mean, there are numerous examples of how we can make a very solid contribution to humanitarian challenges, as well as to issues of peace and security and the global economy. I think that the credentials are there. The problem is that there is one country which is opposing us and stopping us from coming over there. And we need to push and be patient, and I think we'll succeed.
Right. On that note, Atul Aneja, Sir Ashok Sajjanar, sir, thanks very much for joining us
Thank you.
this hour on DD India for this very special coverage of Prime Minister's visit to the US.
Well, that special broadcast continues here.